Okay, before we get started, I'm going to give a little intro here. Many of you may have already been on a Ritter and or a Surge Strength webinar in the past with Chris Ritter, but I know we have some new people in the audience as well as some returners, so I want to take a brief moment to introduce Chris Ritter before he begins his presentation on your Dryland program's #1 goal. Chris is a swimmer, having competed in swimming most of his childhood and eventually in college as well. His final collegiate season was under the legendary swim coach Bob Steele at Cal State University Bakersfield, and that team won the Division II National Championship. While still earning his undergraduate degree, Chris began swim coaching and personal training. He's coached at every level from summer league to working with Olympic swimmers, winning gold medals and breaking world records. Chris has a passion to help push swimming and specifically dryland education forward. He also wants to empower both coaches and swimmers with information to allow them to reach their full potential. That's the origin behind him founding Ritter Sports Performance, which is now going on 11 years helping coaches and swimmers by providing them strength training and dryland programs. We provide programs to athletes and teams all around the world with Surge Strength Dryland. In the last year, Chris led the team at Ritter to create the first and only strength and conditioning certification that specifically addresses dryland training for swimmers, the Surge Strength Dryland certification. Chris's education includes a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology and Exercise Science. He also earned all of the most prominent certifications in both the strength and conditioning field as well as in the swimming world. And as I've mentioned before, Chris has been both coaching swimming and working as a strength coach since well before he was even out of undergrad. He's also continuing to evolve his approach to dryland and would tell you himself that the program he does now is different than what he was doing 5 or 10 years ago. Chris is never done learning. And I know a lot of you in the audience share that virtue of being a lifelong learner, so thank you for being here. In the late 2000s, Chris was one of the only swim coaches in the country that was also certified in strength and conditioning. He's continually adapted strength training principles to specifically help swimmers get faster in the water. He even developed an entire curriculum for one of the largest and most successful clubs in the country. And even though at that time he was one of the youngest coaches on the staff, he was charged with teaching the rest of the coaches how to approach dryland training and get better results with swimmers that they had in their group. This included young age group swimmers like the 10 and unders all the way to the senior swimmers with Olympic trials cuts. And if you're wondering if Chris's approach to dryland training works, the results speak for themselves. He guided Cullen Jones in his Olympic training, in his dryland training leading up to Cullen being part of the most historic relay in Olympic history, when the U.S. came from behind and won gold in world record time in the 2008 Olympic Games. During those Olympic Games, multiple swimmers competed and had been strength training with Chris. A few years after the 2008 Olympics, Chris worked to expand his reach, and that's when Ritter Sports Performance was founded. Their biggest client base then came from master swimming. Chris successfully trained swimmers in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and even 60s to achieve lifetime best swims. Many were swimming faster than they had in college or in high school. Among those swimmers were multiple world champions for master swimming, as well as multiple masters world records broken. To date, the Surge Strength Dryland programs have been delivered to over 1,000 athletes, totaling over 20,000 workouts. I think it's safe to say Chris has a bit of a track record of success when it comes to creating dryland programs, and that result in swimmers going faster. While the dryland programs from Surge Strength are the longest running resource, there's also the Surge Strength podcast. Of course, this webinar, and you can find regular articles from Chris on swimswam.com. Chris is always trying to give more back to the swimming community than he received. The most recent resources that were created in the past year include the Surge Strength Academy, which hosts many free Dryland 101 digital courses. This is also where the Surge Strength Dryland certification is hosted, which has already seen enrollment for hundreds of coaches, swimmers, and supporters of swimmers from around the world to become Surge Strength Dryland certified. And now we're able to put those SSDC credentials behind their name. Chris will speak a little more about your opportunity to join them at the end of the webinar. But now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome and turn it over the presentation to Chris Ritter. Chris, thanks for being here with us today.
Jason, thanks for the introduction. Coaches, swimmers, support staff. I didn't see any parents, at least I didn't take the poll. So welcome, everyone. This is our first webinar that we are going to be kicking off in this Dryland training series that we're going to go actually into September. And we're going to be going every other week. So this is the first one that we're kicking off. Jason's just back from vacation. Glad he was able to join us. I'm getting back in the swing of things from vacation. I know a lot of you are either winding down your season or it's already done, or maybe you have another week or so to go. And Jason, you can feel free to turn off your video too, and we'll see you back at the Q&A. But yeah, I thought start earlier than later in terms of maybe still you have a couple more weeks of your season left, but I'd rather get a jump start on thinking about Dryland for this upcoming season. At the end, I have some really exciting announcements that you are going to be the first to hear. So congratulations for being live on the webinar. You're going to be ready for that. So the title of this first webinar is Your Dryland Program's #1 Goal. And I want to help you center around what I believe that #1 goal should be in terms of if you have focus with your program, whether it's what you're doing in the water or on land, it's always going to be better. And I believe if you have anything to center around, it should be athleticism when it comes to what is your Dryland program's #1 goal. Athleticism. And we're going to get into what this means, the characteristics of it, and then actually what does it look like putting that into practice all the way to helping you write a Dryland workout today with the element or the goal of having athleticism be the centerpiece. So we're going to talk about athleticism. I first think of it as we want to keep the swimmers in the water. And so to avoid injuries and at the same time, increase durability. I don't know if you're watching the NBA finals are going on right now, but a lot of injuries have taken place over the playoffs and into the finals. And you hear it said over and over from the commentators, and I really like it, that sometimes the greatest ability of a player is the availability of that player. And I think that translates into swimming as well. If a swimmer isn't able to practice as hard as they can on a consistent basis, they're never going to reach their potential. So having athleticism so they can be durable through whatever type of training you're doing in the water. And we do that by building a swimmer's body. And there are specific things we really focus on when it comes to the surge strength methodology. And we're going to go over that later as well. And finally, you actually see some results from it. And at the end, I'm going to talk about how to measure how the athleticism is in your group, actually give you standards to go from. And so we've been saying this for a while now, but I really do believe it, that better athletes equal faster swimmers. And that's why you want to make sure athleticism is your #1 goal coming out of your Dryland program. So we're going to get into the heart of the teaching now. So make sure all distractions are off, notifications, hold your questions till the end. We will definitely have a Q&A session where you can type it in the chat, and Jason's going to make sure I get all those questions at the end. So what is athleticism? And this is a big umbrella term. And people, I think, skip over this pretty quickly when they start thinking about, all right, what do we want to get out of Dryland? Of course, we want them to be stronger. Of course, we want more power. Of course, we want more endurance. But at the base of this pyramid here, if your movement is off, is compromised, is limited in some way, everything else that you're building on top of this is going to suffer as a result. So yes, we want to get to strength training. Yes, we want to get to power development and enhancing a swimmer's ability to endure at a certain speed or rate of firing the muscles. But if the movement isn't good, doesn't matter how tall we build that pyramid, at some point it's going to crumble, and that swimmer's probably going to be out of the water for an extended period of time. So we want to make sure that however a swimmer is moving, we can enhance that, because then all the other characteristics that you would think of in a Dryland program are going to benefit. Movement is really the dictator of a lot of these things down the chain. And so this umbrella term of athleticism, it is a big and broad term, but here's some more specific things that encompass athleticism, at least how I'm thinking through it. So coordination is one example. Mobility, the ability to keep rhythm. That's important for almost every stroke, being able to have a rhythm or even change rhythms in a race, reactivity, speed, power, and of course, strength. So all of these can fit under athleticism. So I kind of cheated a little bit when I said, what's the number one goal? There's obviously a lot of things that could come out of athleticism, especially when we get to the part of talking about individualizing training for swimmers at the end. You may have one swimmer in terms of their athleticism goal. Maybe they need to be a lot more mobile. Maybe they're pretty strong. They can do pull-ups, double digits, all that stuff, but they can't touch their hands behind their back. Their shoulders are so tight. Or on the other hand, maybe you have a Gumby type swimmer that can move in all different directions, but they're just really weak. And you need to focus on the strength side of that. So you can see it's a little bit of a catch-all, but it's still important to think about that movement being the start. And we see athleticism a lot in swimming. I remember when I was swimming, we used to still consider swimmers as quote unquote non-athletes and, kind of the clumsy ones. And they couldn't, play a ball sport, or their hand-eye contact was off, their coordination. But we see that you need mobility, power, rhythm, reactivity in all parts of swimming. The unfortunate thing, and I even personally experienced this, is that most swimmers will experience a significant injury at some point during their career. And sometimes that can derail the career completely. Sometimes it can mean missed opportunities like making an Olympic team or getting a scholarship at a certain school. And so we want to make sure we avoid that. So I don't care if you're coaching beginning summer league swimmers, or if you're working with swimmers that are going to be swimming in Tokyo in less than a week here. Injuries are not part of the equation for any swimmer in terms of what they desire to get out of swimming. If you can't improve, if you can't practice, and if you're not in the water, and gets frustrating for coaches and swimmers. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. The tricky thing, though, is that swimming is such a repetitive sport. It's so built in that the math is really against swimmers and coaches from the start. So you need to make sure your Dryland program is something that's buffering against that. Here's just some example numbers that you can see. Your average swimmer, they're taking 14 strokes a lap. Well, if you do a 4,000 yard practice, they're at 160 movements of their shoulder trying to pull through the water. That adds up quickly to almost 1,000,000 strokes in less than a year and a half's time. And so you could think if that's a little off, at some point, it's going to start crumbling your foundation if your movement and mobility is off. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that. And a sound Dryland program, specifically with a balanced program, assessments and testing, that's really going to be a good map and compass for you to navigate that and make sure the majority of your swimmers are staying in the water and able to do whatever training you're throwing at them. And I've always taken this approach from a strength coach position, swim coach position, everything in between. First, do no harm, right? It sounds so simple, but when coaches get excited, when they see exercises scrolling through Instagram or searching around on YouTube, sometimes their enthusiasm gets the better of them. And they're not thinking, okay, what are the drawbacks to this? And what are the chances of injury? Are my swimmers at an appropriate level athletically, strength-wise, any other prerequisites to make sure that this isn't likely going to end in injury, right? Now, we're not going to eliminate injuries completely, but if you implement what I'm telling you, you will see them drastically drop and sometimes disappear for months, if not seasons on end. The problem is, though, if we already have this tension in the water that the math is against us, especially when it comes to something like the shoulders, but then we go on land and a swimmer isn't mobile or isn't strong, the room for error is so much smaller on land in what you do than in the water. So it's even more important that when you're doing a Dryland program, and all of you obviously value Dryland at least some level, you're taking the time out of your day to be on this webinar, you want to make sure that the technique is being coached well so that we can actually see the result of athleticism in swimming. Now, I just got back from Olympic trials as well. It was an awesome experience. And there's a lot of different swimmers' bodies out there. You see the tall ones, the short ones, long limbs, shorter limbs, and everything in between. But there are some characteristics that I think we can train and have be a focus when it comes to your Dryland program. So number one, a high strength to body weight ratio. Can someone do pull-ups? Can they rope climb? Things like that are king examples of how strong a swimmer is relative to how much they weigh. strong core. You can see that both their line cutting in the water, but then also the ability to transfer power from their catch all the way through their kick as they're finishing. And then also being able to be mobile. Like I said, can you touch your hands together behind your back? Can you touch your toes? Can you get in every angle that's required in both the catch and the recovery of your stroke? And can you keep it up? Is it something that you can easily sustain? Now, I think that we've kind of dispelled this, but I still want to put at least one slide to this, that you don't just fall out of bed, start doing a few push-ups, and you're going to look like this guy. So don't be afraid that, oh, if my swimmers start to lift, we're going to get huge. That's a process of not only the programming, but what you're putting into your body, both eating wise and maybe some, in this guy's case, maybe some extra help as well. So don't have this be a fear when it comes to Dryland. And I don't think a lot of you are at that stage. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But again, first, do no harm should always be what you're thinking through when you put your Dryland program together, especially because there's much less room for error than in the water when you're teaching a technique change. You know, swimmers entry or catch can be off a little bit, and it's going to take a long time for that to develop into something like tendonitis or another injury. In the weight room, if you do a deadlift wrong 1 rep, that swimmer may be out for a number of weeks. So you really want to make sure you're paying attention to that. So because that is such an issue, we want to kind of dive into how do injuries actually happen. And I think it's 3 common ways that you're going to see over and over again. Poor technique, too much too fast in terms of how you're programming it, whether that be volume, intensity, weight, rest even, and even number of sessions in a week. And then lastly, imbalances in a swimmer's body. Now, the correction for this is obviously we want to teach correct technique. We want to make sure our programming is progressively overloading and meeting the athlete at the appropriate level. And then having a balanced program will help the imbalances start to disappear. And I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it so many times, I just kind of get used to it. And I forget other people haven't realized this. But when we start implementing, whether it's a team contacting us or a coach getting SSDC certified, that then they start implementing it in a few weeks, few months goes by, well, just a few less shoulder injuries, few less swimmers complaining, oh, you know, coach, I need to sit out here. And eventually it is a non-issue. And that comes to the balanced program. And we're going to spend most of today talking about this in particular. So in order to balance the program, you need to know what you're balancing. And so there are 5 movement categories that I break down any Dryland exercise that you could be doing into one of these buckets. So brace, you want to think about that as your core training. And I specifically used a different name because I want you to think about it in a different way. And I don't have all the time to go into specifically that, but we get much more into that in lessons in the academy. Squat and hinge, the 2 lower body movements. Push and pull, the 2 upper body movements. So we're going to go through each of these categories, give you some exercise examples so you can start to identify. And that's really the litmus test. If you can look at any exercise that you find and put it into one of those 5 buckets, you are on your way to educating yourself about Dryland, and you're probably going to have better results. So when it comes to bracing exercises, we have a couple different positions that you can be in: prone, facing the ground; supine, facing up towards the sky; and vertical. Now, you want to have the ability to engage your core muscles all around 360, but at the same time, be able to breathe. And this is the first instance where you can really see movement or lack of movement or restricted movement be an issue for an athlete. Oftentimes, if athletes are pretty weak in their core, they also don't have the ability to breathe and maintain tension. And so even that is a real thing to work on. And that's not doing more abs by any means. That's actually going through some kind of rehabilitation exercises, lower level core training exercises for the athlete to reintegrate in their body and understand how to control their body in a certain way, being able to have tension and be breathing. So it's much more than just abs. And that's why I specifically didn't name it core, because I wanted you to make sure you're thinking about everything that is involved. And so as you can see, that's lots of muscles. It's much more than the abs, especially on the back. It goes all the way up, erector spinatus, all the way up to your neck. Here is what I would consider part of that bracing musculature. So here's some examples too that we can actually see in action. What does this look like? So stir the pot here. He's in a prone position, going back and forth. Bridge, drag, and stability ball. So that's where he's pulling sandbag under, and then all the while maintaining tension on that. And let me know, guys, too, if any audio switched. I muted on my end, so we don't hear the video. So in case anything messed up, just type in the chat. Let me know on that. Turkish get up. So this is a pretty more advanced one. It takes a while for an athlete to even get the prerequisites to do this, but this is a great movement if you can do it, if your athletes have the prerequisites in terms of the mobility, the athleticism, and the strength. But that's some examples of the bracing exercise. So now we go to the lower body, and squat and hinge. They're opposites and they kind of counter each other. So with both of these, you have two main positions that you're going to be doing these movements from, either a double leg stance or a single leg stance. Now, a squat is greater than 90-degree movement at the knee joint. The chest still stays tall. The hips go down and back. And so we could see the muscles, obviously, they're going to be muscles of the leg that are involved, but the front, inside, back, and outside of them. And here's a couple examples so you can get an idea of what that looks like. So the goblet squat with the kettlebell. Again, chest is staying tall, hips are sitting down and back. You see pressure even throughout the foot. Now we're in a single leg stance, rear foot elevated squat. So we have one foot behind us. We're driving through the front foot, pushing through the heel. Again, you can see chest stays tall, hips are sitting down and back from the start position. And then a little bit more complicated one, a single arm overhead squat with a kettlebell. So you're going to have that chest still stay tall, even though there's a weight overhead, and your hips are sitting down and back. And even though you can't see the feet are still even pressure all the way across from toes to heels. Now, hinge, the counterpart of the squat on the lower body, same thing in terms of positions. You either have a double leg or single leg. Now, this one is different in the squat, and sometimes people confuse this. We want most of the movement to come from the hip joint and as little as possible to come from the knee. The back and torso is going to stay engaged, and most of the time, it's actually going to end up more parallel to the ground. This is a big thing when we talk about technique, is if you're running a dryland session, you should never see your athletes and kind of question, okay, are they doing a hinge or a squat? It should be very clear. They're either squatting or hinging. It's when you kind of get mixed up that it's not only going to produce less results, effectiveness from that exercise, but can also put the athlete in a greater position of injury. Another way to think about it is, what are the angles of the body look like? So again, hinge is on the left side here, where the chest and torso are almost parallel to the ground. You see the hips have been pushed back to lower the body down. Whereas the squat, the chest is always up high, head is looking forward, hips are sitting down and back. So if you could just picture that all the time and visualize that, and make sure your athletes aren't in some kind of weird middle hybrid thing. They're either hinging, pushing the hips back, chest down, or squatting, chest staying up, hips sitting down. And similar musculature that is involved, but also with the hinge. And we're getting questions on this of, okay, Chris, I kind of get why the brace is important, why squat's important. You know, you want your legs to be strong in the start, but they get tripped up on explaining the hinge to their athletes. And this is where the hinge and the brace almost kind of go over each other a little bit, especially when we're talking about the posterior part of the body and along the spine. So obviously we want to do brace movements and core training to keep that line in the water for that swimmer to be as rigid as possible. Kayak is going to go faster through the water than a rubber raft. And the hinge and brace work together in a lot of ways and overlap in the muscles that they are using for the movements and for what a swimmer is doing in the water. So there's a lot of hidden benefit to the hinge, even though it may not look at it immediately when you see some of these exercises. So here we have a pretty classic RDL, Romanian deadlift. Again, pushing the hips back, chest staying rigid, torso staying rigid, but it's coming down towards the ground as the hips push back. Then we have an explosive exercise in this movement category, like a swing with a kettlebell. Again, hips are sitting back. There's a little knee movement there, maybe a little less if we could coach that up. But again, you could hopefully see the difference is that the movement is not being generated from the knees. It's much more from the hips going back, the chest and torso staying tight and moving up and down parallel to the floor. And another advanced one, single leg deadlift. And again, even though I'm on one leg, you can see it's minimal movement from the knee. Knee's just bending a little bit. We don't want to lock the knee out in any of these movements, but the movement is coming from the hip, torso, chest staying engaged, coming down parallel to the ground, and then back up. So now we're going to switch to the upper body here, pushing, pulling. Counterpart's pretty simple. And in terms of the type of movements that you're going to see for each of these categories, you can put them in a subcategory of horizontal or vertical for both the push and pull. So for the push, bracing and how well an athlete can brace is going to be directly correlated with how well they can do most pushing movements as well. We already talked about a little overlap between the hinge and the brace. Same thing is true with the push and the brace as well. So you can see the muscles involved, front side of the body, and then on the back side, the triceps as well. So that's the only real muscle on the posterior side of the body that's involved in a push. All the other muscles are on the front. And so here's some examples here. Drop down push-up. This would be a actually real beginner level exercise, a level 1 exercise. And it's just slowly going down. So this is an eccentric only part of the exercise, or a negative. We just refer to them as drop downs there. And so you can see tension is through the body. You can see how this could kind of look like a brace neck exercise if you're just looking at the head, shoulders, hips. They're all staying tight, just like you would in most bracing exercises, even in a lot of hinging. And that's where you can start to see the overlap there between the categories. Here's a little bit more advanced. This is probably a level 2 exercise, kneeling single arm press, or it actually might even be a high level 1 exercise. And so you can see here, staying tall, you're having to keep that tension in your torso area, but then you're pushing up vertically now instead of horizontally with the pressure. And then here's an explosive exercise from the horizontal position for the push category, just a chest pass with a medicine ball. So now the counterpart, pull, again, horizontal and vertical movements. Now, for most times, the elbows are going to go to full extension for almost every exercise in the pull, and you want to keep your head and your hips in line. That's for most exercises. There can be some caveats, but for the most part, that's the case. Now with the pull, if all the muscles were on the front for the push, you can guess, yes, all the muscles are on the back for the pull, except the bicep, counter to the tricep, is on the front side of the body, and that aids in some movements of the pull. And so we can see here a couple examples, an explosive one like a slam, med ball. So you can see head to hips, trying to stay tall and tight. And especially for a swimmer, I like that, especially teaching it for this exercise more than sometimes you'll see people slam and really lean over. I would rather, especially for swimmers, almost every time you're in the water, your body's trying to stay nice and tall. Why not add that in to the exercise a little bit? Here you can see a bent knee row. So this is a level 1 exercise. And you can see head to shoulders, pretty tight, even line. Elbows are going out to full extension at the end, and then pulling up as hard as possible, driving the elbows back. And then we have the chest pull-up. This is a level 3 exercise. So overhand grip for a pull-up versus underhand grip is the chin-up. And staying nice and tall, head to hips, but then going all the way up. So it's not just the chin above the bar, but a chest pull-up. You're trying to get your chest, the middle of your sternum, all the way up to the bar as well. So that's the categories you want to think about when you're writing a workout. And here's the checklist you want to go through when you're actually sitting down to write a workout for the day. And we're going to go over some of the bigger points that you need to think of. But first of all, when you're sitting down to write, you need to know, well, what's the point of today's session? Am I trying to get strength? Am I trying to get power, endurance? Is it simply a warm-up, like a quick 10, 15-minute dryland, and then we're jumping in the water? Is it maybe a focus of a function or mobility session, especially maybe post a hard practice? Or is it an unload? Maybe they just got back from a taper meet and you're just having them do a few days of dryland, nothing in the water before maybe they take a vacation for a week or two. That could be entirely applicable right now for this time of the season as well. So it's important to know what is the overall goal of today's session. Then some other things going down the checklist, you got to figure out, all right, how many athletes do I have? What's the amount of space that I'm going to work with, and what type of equipment do I have available. Then once you've figured out those kind of bigger rock variables for a session, you can simply make circuits. And I like the sweet spot of circuits being 3 to 6 exercises and usually around 5, because if 5, I can hit one exercise for each of the categories that we went over: brace, hinge, squat, pull, push. And I can even move around the order a little bit. I typically like to alternate between an upper body and a lower body. You get a little bit more of a cardio effect from that, even though that's not our main focus. So something like a squat to a push, to a hinge, to a pull, to a brace, something like that for a circuit. And so again, you're just looking at, all right, what are my 5 categories? I want to make sure I have balance in that. Then it's picking the appropriate level for the swimmer. Now, we definitely don't have time to go over all that this entails in this webinar, but in the Surge Strength Dryland certification, we walk you through how do you tie the assessments and what an athlete tests at to what level of exercise they should be doing that's appropriate. So it's helping you quickly be able to individualize group training, or if make it even easier if you're just working with a one-on-one athlete, which for club coaches or college coaches, it's almost never happening that way. It's almost always a group setting. So through that process, it can be pretty simple to then churn out a workout that is balanced in terms of all 5 movement categories. So we're not doing one movement category more than another. And if we ever were going to, we do more hinging than squatting and more pulling than pushing. But a minimum, we just want to make sure we're even with our ratios to have that balanced program. And that's the key for those imbalances to start disappear. It's so you can see how going through that process is actually pretty simple if you have something as simple as a checklist and knowing what are the main variables I have to figure out. And most times, equipment, space, number of athletes isn't going to vary that much. So if you have those set for the season coming up, you can then spend your time more on, all right, what exercise do I want to go? How do I want to progress the swimmers? And remembering too, the intensity does not equal effort. So what you're doing in the water is going to have a direct effect on what they can do on dry land. So if you hit them with a really hard, 4,000 yard test set and then get in dry land and think they're just going to be fresh and we can do some great power, you're going to be upset and mistaken as a coach. And the swimmers are probably going to get upset and or injured in a session like that. So you have to relate it to not only the training you're doing in the water, but to each athlete and sometimes each day to be able to scale it. One of the mistakes I see coaches making, either they don't know the athleticism should be their number one goal, but even worse, they're just trying to chase fatigue. There's this idea of, all right, in the water, maybe they're not getting a lot of rest and they're always moving. Maybe you're training as a culture of that, and that's fine, but don't take that over to land. That's probably the worst thing you could do. You want rest in between your sets. You don't want swimmers running from one station to the other. You want technique to be solid. And the more that fatigue is present, the less technically sound each exercise is going to be. So don't confuse that as a goal of, all right, let's just get them as tired as possible. You want to get them as athletic and then as strong as possible. I love this quote by Dr. Fred Hatfield, nicknamed Dr. Squat. You can look him up, super strong power lifter. And so if anybody knows about training hard, training intensely, I think it'd be someone that is squatting, over 1,000 pounds. So his quote here of train to success as opposed to training to failure, I think really rings true in thinking through that, of keeping athleticism as our main goal and not just chasing fatigue and trying to get them tired. And the other thing, we see someone like, a great swimmer and that great underwater catch. That's from athleticism. That's not because they did some super secret swim specific stretches or exercises. That's because as a whole, this is an athlete that has mobility in all the key requisites, the shoulder being probably the first one that we want to address. And so you can see how following the path I just explained is going to help you get to athletes looking like this in the water. It's not just by, getting some bands and trying to mimic this over and over again. It's by having a balanced program with all the categories, make sure you're at the relative appropriate intensity for the athlete. And unfortunately, coaches get in this cycle where they're doing the same thing and expecting different results. And of course, that is insanity in that. And so if you haven't already, and I'm sure a lot of you have, this is your first time on the webinar, that you've done this before, you've been with us for before. This is a new thing, but if anything, hopefully it's a reminder for you as you're starting to sit down for your dryland planning for the upcoming season. And actually that just, actually, no, I'm going to do that a little bit later. So going back to the ideal swimmer's body, we got the three things: high strength, body weight ratio, a strong core, and having mobility. Now, after you've done a couple weeks of workouts, a couple months, and it's good to know this now before you're going into the season, these are the general athleticism standards I would have for any swimmer 13, 14, and up. That these are the minimum they should get to. So again, minimum, not maximum, minimum line in the sand that I would like to see athletes get to, either as early in their career as we can in terms of middle school, high school, or definitely by the time they're graduating high school and going into college. Now, some of these may look a little lofty to you, and I want to readjust your frame of mind on that. If we just talked about Dr. Squat earlier. If you talk to any collegiate strength coach, and we showed them these, they would probably laugh a little bit like, okay, that's not very strong, because they're going to have athletes deadlifting and squatting 3, 4, even 5 times their body weight sometimes. So this is why I say, let's just get the athletes to kind of the beginning level. And so then in college, you can expand it even more. And so you can see here from deadlift, squat, pull-ups, push-ups, we have our big 4 categories there. And then the bracing category is the bridge combo. And that's a really tough one in and of itself. I'm sure a lot of you have groups where not even half your athletes could pass the bridge combo test. Now I'll walk you through that real fast right here. I didn't put a video in this presentation. You can also look at it on our YouTube page. But what it consists of is you're in a bridge position. You hold that for 1 minute. Once 1 minute is up, you then lift one foot a couple inches off the ground for 15 seconds. Then you switch to the other feet for 15 seconds. Then you put both feet back down. Now you're reaching out a hand for 15, then the other hand for 15. We're now at 2 minutes. For the last 30 seconds, you're going 15 seconds with your left arm out and right foot up, and then right arm out, left foot up for 15 to get to 2.5. That is the minimum standard I look for in terms of core bracing ability. If you can't do that, if your athletes can't do that, it is poor and it needs to be addressed immediately and is holding back progress in the water greatly. So I know some coaches, when I tell them about this, they're like, man, not even 2 of my athletes in my group could do that. You got a lot of work to do. But the positive thing, or the positive way to look at, is you're doing great stuff in the water, probably with the training and the technique. If you can just get them a little bit stronger, a little bit more athletic, it is going to allow their ceiling to be that much higher of what they can accomplish through the training you're already giving them. So we went through a lot of that stuff. And for some of you, maybe a lot to consume. For others, it may be a pretty quick review. I'm not sure where you're following in that, but I would challenge you, wherever you are on that, try to look at what are the old habits that you're just doing season after season without even thinking about. And that's why I wanted to start this so early, to give plenty of time to think about and analyze what are you going to do with Dryland in this upcoming season. Hopefully things are opening up a little bit more. You have more access to equipment. I know that was a huge challenge for a lot of coaches and swimmers in this last year, but wherever you fall on the spectrum of, if you could have recited everything I told you already, or if all of it was new, think about what are the habits you're kind of stuck in and what maybe do you need to shift. Maybe it's a lot of things. Maybe you need a complete overhaul, or maybe it's just a few little things. Maybe it's like, oh, maybe I want to assess a little bit more throughout the season so I can track where we're going as opposed to the athletic standards here. But I just want you to think about one or a few things that you can change specifically in Dryland in this upcoming season. So if you get to that point, you're like, all right, Chris, I'm on board. Well, here are your options from that. You can decide, okay, I've identified a few things, but I'm not going to do anything about them. I got other stuff to worry about. You could go it alone, or, and plenty of people have, but at some point you're going to have questions or get frustrated or whatever, or you can turn to us for help. And how we can help specifically is, we are onboarding a bunch of individuals and teams currently for the upcoming season, where we give them custom Dryland programs through our app, or you can enroll in the academy. And in the academy, remember, we have almost a dozen now Dryland 101 courses that are free. And then also time to time, we allow people to enroll to become Surge Strength Dryland certified and put that SSDC behind their name. So you can go to our website for either one of those. They're both on the front page for more information on those.